Some games are made to be fun, others are designed to tell touching stories, some games are made to bring people together, and others tear families apart. And then there are games designed to be nostalgic. Many of us grew up with games that have long been forgotten. Luckily, as indie developers and crowdfunding platforms grew in popularity, several forgotten games and genres have been given a second chance at life, either through direct sequels or spiritual successors. Yooka Laylee is one such game. A group of developers formed a new studio, Playtonic Games, and launched their first Kickstarter project in 2015 with the intention of reviving the collect-a-thon, a type of platformer where the goal is to collect as many things as possible to progress, reminiscent of games made by developer Rare from the 90s like Donkey Kong 64 or Banjo Kazooie. In fact, some of the developers of those games also worked on Yooka Laylee, and this got people excited. Lots of people. Yooka Laylee was specifically intended to be a spiritual successor to Banjo Kazooie, and putting the two games side by side, the similarities are pretty obvious. While there's nothing wrong with this in theory, it may have also been the game's fatal flaw. On release, reception was very mixed. While some people loved the game, others absolutely hated it, and for a long time the discourse online was largely negative. For everything that Yooka Laylee did, Banjo Kazooie, despite being nearly 20 years older, remained the fan favorite. Now, I understand that a handful of indie developers with a Kickstarter budget can't possibly compete with a larger team funded by Nintendo, but I think that Playtonic shot themselves in the foot by making this game too similar to its predecessor. Now, if we judge the game by its own merits, how bad is it really? The game begins when Hivory Towers opens up a new corporate office in Shipwreck Creek. Headed by the evil CEO Capital B and his vice president Dr. Quack, the two set a new money-making scheme in motion. Activate a giant vacuum to suck up all the books in the world, specifically the One Book, which has the power to rewrite entire worlds. Our heroes, Yooka the Chameleon and Laylee the Bat, moved in nearby and just happened to find the One Book underneath some floorboards. They make plans to sell the book, but before they can, it gets sucked up by Capital B's giant vacuum. As it flies off, all of its golden pages fall out, and our heroes set off to get back their book. Your main goal in this game is to find and retrieve all those golden pieces of paper, called pages. Inside Hivory Towers, you'll find the Grand Tomes, and with enough pages, you can open them up to explore the worlds within, allowing you to find even more pieces of paper. But pages aren't the only thing to collect. Quills are also scattered throughout each world and can be traded to a snake named Trowzer, who will teach you a variety of important moves like how to fly, or how to make a fart bubble underwater so that you can walk around and breathe. All the important stuff. These moves allow you to reach new areas, find more collectibles, and climb further up Hivory Towers to get to Capital B. There are 200 quills to find in each level, and if you find them all, you get another pagey. Each world also has 5 Ghost Riders, and collecting them all will get you yet another pagey. Find a play coin, and you can try and win some pages at the local arcade. If you find a Molly Cool and bring it to Dr. Puzz, she can transform you into different things like a helicopter or a boat to find more pages. One level takes place in a giant casino, and here you'll collect casino tokens to trade in for more pages. If you can't tell by now, it's papers all the way down. The ultimate goal here is to get to the top of Hivory Towers with 100 of those pages so that you can confront Capital B and put an end to his evil plan. It sounds silly, but it's a tried and true gameplay loop, though not one we see too much anymore. Hivory Towers acts as a hub world you'll need to navigate to reach the other levels in the game. Functionally, it's fine. It gets you from one world to the next, and you collect pages and get moves from Trowzer along the way. But in terms of character, Hivory Towers embraces its corporate theme by making areas that are bland and filled with mindless drones. It's just not an interesting place to explore. There are no surprises hidden around these corners. The devs really nailed that corporate atmosphere of, is it 5 o'clock yet? I'm tired of being here. The Grand Tome worlds, on the other hand, are much more interesting. These worlds are more vibrant and varied, ranging from a warm tropical region to a sprawling casino to a great sea beneath the night sky. There are 5 of these worlds found throughout Hivory Towers, each with their own characters, challenges, moves to learn, and collectibles to find. These worlds are wide open for players to explore with no set path to take. Just pick a direction and collect whatever you can find. As you explore, you may come across dead ends and locked doors that seem impassable. With even more pages, you can expand the Grand Tomes, opening these doors and creating new paths in the world. It's a unique concept that ultimately misses the mark. With the exception of the final world, these expanded regions don't really offer anything new, and having several paths blocked off initially just means you're going to be backtracking through the world. But that's a pretty minor issue considering the point of these collect-a-thons is to thoroughly explore each world and find everything that you can. The real issue with this game, however, is how wildly everything varies in quality. You might be challenged to run through an obstacle course or race another character around the world, or maybe you'll come across a small puzzle to solve. And many of these are fun, but other times the game has you making the exact same jump or using the same move several times in a row with no variation whatsoever. Enemy variety feels good in World 1, but then it turns out that every world has the same 5 or 6 brain-dead enemies, just with a different look. Each world has a boss battle, and while they're all pretty creative in design, some of them go on for so long that I began to wonder if I was doing something wrong. Trowzer will teach you lots of different moves that can be rather versatile, while others have limited use. The camo cloak ability, for instance, can be used to blend into the environment and sneak past cameras, but you can't sneak past enemies with it. Another example can be found in Glitterback Glacier. By eating fire berries, Yooka is able to breathe fire, which can melt blocks of ice, but it can't melt these piles of snow for some reason. Only the snowplow transformation can take care of those. In order to transform, you have to find the Mollycool hidden in each world and bring it to Dr. Puzz. This Mollycool powers her DN Ray and turns Yooka Laylee into something different for each world. In Galleon Galaxy, she transforms you into a pirate ship to navigate the open sea. This transformation is crucial for completing several different challenges. It changes up how you explore the level, and it provides a unique experience that you won't find in any of the other worlds. Alternatively, in Tribalstack Tropics, you transform into a flower, which moves around slowly and is only used to get one single pagey. This transformation is a complete waste, and it feels like it's here purely out of obligation. Oh right, I already forgot. Exploring worlds and collecting collectibles is generally the highlight of the game, but even that's lacking at times. Where Banjo Kazooie had small, compact worlds with music notes laid along paths to lead the player through different parts of the level, Yooka Laylee has large worlds with swaths of empty land and quills that sometimes indicate points of interest. This ring of quills, for example, is well placed to draw the player in and lead them to the hidden blue Ghost Rider. But elsewhere in the same level, you have this one lone quill tucked away in a corner that you otherwise have no reason to go to. Or this group of quills that is tediously spread out to the far edges of this arena by these doors that lead you absolutely nowhere. The tokens in Capital Cashino have a similar problem. Tokens are found all throughout the level, and for every 10 that you find, you can cash them in for a pagey. You may be awarded a handful of tokens for winning at a slot machine or for helping someone out, but you also might find a single token hidden in some hole in the ground. It's this inconsistency that plagues the entire game, and it left me confused and frustrated more than anything. And then other parts of this game are downright awful, particularly Dr. Quack's quiz time. As you climb further up Hivory Towers, Dr. Quack will quiz you on your progress so far. The quiz show is probably one of the more poorly aged parts of Banjo Kazooie, but instead of building on the idea or just cutting it out entirely, it's neutered to the point that it's devoid of any personality, challenge, or fun. It's just another part of Yooka Laylee that only exists because Banjo did it. Yooka Laylee also features a variety of minigames. Some, like Kartos Minecart Racing, can be a very fun change of pace. Elsewhere, though, you have Rextro, a lovable little dinosaur who's stuck in the past and just wants somebody to play arcade games with. Rextro is a great character, one of the best to talk to, but after playing his games, I can understand why all of his friends abandoned him. Mechanically, these games are very simple to the point of being mind-numbing. These challenges last maybe 5 minutes apiece and still somehow manage to be repetitive and dull. There's no depth at all. And then, once you beat them, Rextro will offer you another pagey if you can beat his high score, even if you already did that on your first try. All of these games are too long and boring the first time through, then you're expected to beat them again with no changes whatsoever. Speaking of long and boring, characters in this game really just don't know when to stop talking. Occasionally, this game has that old school rare humor. You know, puns, dirty jokes, breaking the fourth wall. But more often than not, the characters just ramble on and on without having anything worth saying. And this applies to Capital B too. While exploring Hivory Towers, he'll randomly talk to you, but he rarely says anything interesting or funny. He's not even funny to laugh at, he's just annoying. My game plan has many key pillars, and exploding minions are definitely one. One part of the game that was criticized on release is the camera, but it's mostly been fixed with patches. It still struggles in tight corridors, and it's especially bad in the minecart minigame for Moody Maze Marsh, where the camera just loses its with every slight tilt of the tracks. But most of the game takes place in wide open spaces, and the camera works without issue here. The music was also widely criticized, and I honestly don't see why. Maybe it's not as catchy or as memorable as Banjo Kazooie, but that doesn't make it bad either. The music is fitting for each area and is full of personality. And furthermore, each world has variations of its main theme depending on where you are, such as underwater or in a cave. Obviously, music is subjective, but it really didn't deserve all the hate that it got. There's still one last mechanic to talk about, and it's one of the best additions to the game: tonics. Throughout the game, you'll run into Vendy, a kind-hearted vending machine who will give you tonics if you can complete certain challenges, like defeating a certain number of enemies or collecting a number of pages. You can equip one tonic at a time, and each one has a different effect. One can increase your power meter, one gives you more health, and another allows you to grab quills from a distance. Nothing really important, but they can make the game easier or harder for some much-needed variety. There's even one to make the graphics look more like a Nintendo 64 game. This one is honestly pretty neat, but it also makes my eyes hurt, so I'm gonna go ahead and never use this one again. Many of these flaws I've mentioned also apply to Banjo Kazooie, but it's easier to forgive Banjo because the game released in 1998. Yooka Laylee released in 2017, and it feels like a game stuck in the 90s. To be clear, I think there's still room for collect-a-thons nowadays, but Playtonic just couldn't find their footing with this one. There's still some good stuff here: exploring new areas with all the different moves available to you, running through obstacle courses or racing NPCs. The minecart minigame is a ton of fun when the camera works, and tonics let the player change up the game in some neat ways. But the game as a whole is just so wildly inconsistent that I can't recommend it. Despite the rocky start, Playtonic didn't give up on this dynamic duo. Just 2 years later, they released another game, Yooka Laylee and the Impossible Lair. Capital B is at it again with another evil plan. This time, he's aiming to take over the Royal Stingdom with the help of his new magical staff, the Hive Mind, which allows him to mind control other bees. Queen Phoebe, the ruler of the Royal Stingdom, asks Yooka and Laylee to help save her battalion and put a stop to Capital B. The game begins and ends right here in the Impossible Lair. Within minutes of starting the game, you're confronting Capital B, and if you manage to beat him, he just retreats further into this extremely long dungeon of traps and minions until Yooka and Laylee are finally defeated. Luckily, Queen Phoebe is there to rescue our heroes, pulling them both to safety. Once Yooka and Laylee get their bearings, Queen Phoebe asks them to go back and stop Capital B to save her Royal Stingdom. But how are you supposed to beat a so-called Impossible Lair? Well, you see, despite the name, the Impossible Lair is not actually impossible. Rather, it is just really difficult. It utilizes nearly every mechanic found throughout the game. You have difficult platforming challenges, rope and vine sections, icy floors, underwater areas, cannon launchers, just about every enemy in the game, multiple battles with Capital B, and more. While it is possible to beat the Impossible Lair from the very start of the game, your best bet will be to find the other Grand Tomes and rescue members of the battalion that Capital B captured. The battalion will act as a shield, and for each one that you save, you can take another hit or survive another fall in the Impossible Lair. There are 48 total to find, meaning you can take 48 hits before Yooka and Laylee are really in danger. Even with the entire battalion though, this level is no joke, and it will test everything you've learned so far. To save the various members of the battalion, you'll have to explore the overworld for Grand Tomes. Like the first game, these Grand Tomes will take you to entirely new worlds, each with their own challenges. But where the first game took you to big open worlds to explore, Yooka Laylee and the Impossible Lair is a more traditional 2D platformer with linear side-scrolling levels. This game will have you exploring cities and factories, underground mines, and woods infested with spiders. Sometimes you'll be up in the clouds or running across windmills in the countryside, and at the end of each level, you'll find another battalion member to assist you in the Impossible Lair. There are 20 grand tomes to explore, and each of them has a variant based on your actions in the overworld. One level may start out as a regular factory, and by opening some waterways and flooding the grand tome in the overworld, you can also flood the factory within. You can freeze a city over, create a tornado. Hell, one level starts as a standard horizontal level, and by flipping a switch in the overworld, you can flip the level on its side, turning it into a vertical level instead. These variants don't just change the levels visually, but also open up brand new routes to explore, and introduce totally different enemies and obstacles. They're not harder versions of the same level, they are different levels entirely. Each of these locations you explore is so vibrant and full of personality. The Grand Tomes and their variants all come across like their own worlds full of color, details, and character. Everything is wonderfully animated. Yooka and Laylee are extremely expressive with each of their moves, whether they be swimming, climbing, or rolling around. Enemies are no longer reskins of each other and instead have their own movement patterns, attacks, and animations to give them a whole load of personality. Even the backgrounds can be distractingly beautiful, as though there's an entire world beyond the level that we get to play. And then there's the music, which I don't even know where to begin. This is a top-tier gaming soundtrack from beginning to end. Each track brings a ton of personality to the levels that you play, and after beating the game, I have listened to the soundtrack several times over. There are so many great tracks here, from fast and frantic bops, to serene and relaxing themes, to intense adrenaline raisers. Some songs are bangers from the very beginning, while others start slow and build up as you make your way through the level. This soundtrack is hit after hit after hit. But these levels aren't just pretty to look at and listen to, they're also extremely fun to play. The level design is phenomenal throughout, with a wide variety of platforming challenges and no wasted space. Though these levels are linear, they're still full of side paths, hidden collectibles, and sometimes even secret exits to find. Levels are packed full of quills to collect, with ghost quills providing optional challenges to try to get even more. No two levels play quite the same, and each is highly replayable. The controls are incredibly precise. Whether on the ground, in the air, or underwater, movement is tight, responsive, and consistent. This game has some of the best hitboxes I have ever seen. I never felt cheated when I died because every hit I took felt like it was my mistake, then I could have done better. If you do take a hit, Laylee will get scared and start flying all about. You have a short time to catch her and calm her down, but if you take too long, she flies off and Yooka is left all by himself. If you take another hit after that, it's game over. Losing Laylee also means that you lose access to some abilities. You can't use the Buddy Slam, which is needed to access some secret areas and collectibles, and there's no more gliding in the air, meaning you have less room for error when jumping. It really feels like these two are working together, and levels can be a lot more challenging when Yooka is all by himself. Although, if you don't catch Laylee before she flies away, you can still call her back by ringing one of these bat bells. And then there's the overworld, which is basically one big level in and of itself. And most 2D platformers like this have a glorified level select menu for their overworld, but the overworld in the Yooka Laylee and the Impossible Lair is much more interactive, with its own puzzles and platforming challenges to overcome. It makes for a nice change of pace from the Grand Tomes, and you'll run into many returning characters from the first game. Progress in the overworld is blocked by several paywalls. These are manned by your friendly neighborhood swindler, Trowzer. In order to pass, you'll have to pay him in Twit coins. There are 5 of these coins to be found in each level, and some are surprisingly difficult to find, but getting them all is very satisfying, and they'll allow you to access more of the world. Also found in the overworld are tonics. Some of these you'll be able to see and will require some cleverness to obtain, while others are so obscurely hidden that you'll need some help from the game's talking signposts. They'll give you hints about the locations of these hidden tonics, but you'll have to pay them in quills to get them to talk. After finding these tonics, you're able to buy them from Vendy. You can then equip up to 3 or 4 at a time in order to make levels easier or harder, or you can give levels a complete graphical overhaul. Do you want to play through an entire level like it's a Game Boy game? I don't know why you would, but you can! The collect-a-thon nature of the original game is alive and well with the quills, tonics, and twit coins, but collecting everything is so much more fun and rewarding than it was before. The writing is also much improved. The dialogue is much more concise and less rambly than the first game, so the pacing flows much better and the jokes land more often. I actually found myself laughing quite a bit here. The game as a whole takes on a kind of storybook theme that's really fitting for these characters and the different worlds they explore, and it left me wanting more. This isn't some masterclass of writing or anything, but it is every bit as enjoyable as the rest of the game, and it even hints at what may come in the next one. This game is truly something special. If the original Yooka Laylee is reminiscent of the clunky and poorly aged 3D platformers of the 90s, then Yooka Laylee in the Impossible Lair is reminiscent of the refined, creative, and timeless 2D games of that same decade. It's got that tight and rewarding level design, that vibrant art and music, a little bit of that old school difficulty, and a hell of a lot of charm. My only complaint with this game is that there's not enough of it. I spent around 20 hours playing through this game, and I would have gladly played another 20 hours if there were more levels or a time trial mode to go through. You know, I was pretty disappointed with the original Yooka Laylee, but I'm really glad that Playtonic didn't give up on this buddy duo after the rough start that they had. While the Impossible Lair wasn't a perfect game, it really does feel like Playtonic found their footing here. The design of the Impossible Lair feels much more confident, and I think it helped that the developers weren't bound to Kickstarter promises or to a recreation of something from the 90s. While the inspiration of the older classics is still there, that's all it is, inspiration. The Impossible Lair stands on its own in the modern age and shows that we can look to the past without being beholden to it. This lizard and bat duo has a lot of potential adventures ahead of them, and I'm pretty excited to see what Playtonic comes up with next. Hey, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, as that can really help the channel out. And if you'd like to support me more directly, I also have a Patreon linked in the description. My next video will be on The Legend of Zelda, specifically the first 3 games. I'm aiming for a late May, early June release, and if you don't want to miss that, be sure to ring the bell for notifications. Thank you again for watching, and take care.